What's an old man like you need a gun for? To shoot birthday cakes? A clerk laughed mockingly, removing a pistol from the hand of a trembling old man at the checkout counter. Before he could explain, the old man was dragged outside by security, amid the sneering looks of young customers. 57 minutes later, 8 men in SEAL uniforms walked into the store and demanded to meet whoever kicked him out. Type, "Respect your vets," if you believe no one has the right to humiliate someone who once defended their country. Walter Briggs was 78 years old, a former Navy SEAL who had served with distinction in Vietnam and the Persian Gulf. Despite his age, he maintained the rigid discipline and quiet bearing that had defined his military career. He lived alone in a modest apartment, his walls decorated with faded photographs of teammates who hadn't made it home. This morning, Walter had a special mission. He wanted to purchase a Colt 1911 pistol as a coming-of-age gift for his grandson, continuing a family tradition that stretched back 3 generations. His own father had presented him with the same model on his 18th birthday, just before Walter shipped out to Southeast Asia. Frontline Tactical was the newest gun store in town, designed to appeal to younger customers with its sleek, modern displays and high-tech atmosphere. The staff was young, enthusiastic, and had never served in the military. To them, guns were toys, accessories, symbols of status rather than tools of survival. Walter entered wearing a faded windbreaker and well-worn jeans, his hands showing the tremor that had developed in recent years. But his eyes remained sharp and alert, carrying the focused intensity of someone who had seen combat. He approached the glass display case with reverence, carefully examining the Colt 1911, the same model that SEALs had carried in the early days. To Walter, this wasn't just a firearm, it was a piece of history, a symbol of service and sacrifice. Tyler, a 23-year-old employee with perfectly styled hair and an attitude to match, noticed Walter's intense interest in the expensive pistol. The old man's clothes suggested he probably couldn't afford such a premium weapon. "What's an old man like you need a gun for?" Tyler asked with a smirk. "To shoot birthday cakes?" The other customers in the store turned to look, several of them chuckling at Tyler's joke. A young woman pulled out her phone, whispering to her friend, "This is going to get millions of views on TikTok." Walter said nothing. He simply reached into his jacket and withdrew his wallet, carefully placing his concealed carry permit and veteran identification card on the counter. Tyler barely glanced at the documents. With a dismissive gesture, he snatched the pistol from Walter's hands and waved toward the security guard. "People faking documents like this are getting more creative every day," Tyler announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Rick, the security guard, approached with obvious reluctance. A few customers looked uncomfortable, but none spoke up to defend the elderly man who stood with quiet dignity despite the public humiliation. Walter's only response was to grip his old military cap tighter, the one with the faded SEAL trident that few people bothered to notice anymore. He had faced enemy fire without flinching, but this casual cruelty from the people he had once protected cut deeper than any bullet. Security guard Rick approached Walter with obvious discomfort. He was a veteran himself, Army, 2 tours in Iraq, and something about the old man's bearing told him this wasn't right. But Tyler was his supervisor's nephew, and Rick needed this job. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Rick said quietly, hoping to handle the situation with minimal drama. A young woman near the ammunition display whispered to her boyfriend, "He just wanted to buy a gun. This seems wrong." But her voice was lost in the murmur of other customers who were more interested in the entertainment than the injustice. Tyler's voice grew louder, playing to his audience. "We can't have people wandering in here with fake documents trying to buy weapons. It's a liability issue." Walter remained silent as Rick gently took his arm and guided him toward the exit. His military training had taught him when to fight and when to retreat, but this felt like neither. It felt like abandonment by the very society he had sworn to protect. As they reached the door, Tyler called out one final insult. "Next time, try the toy store down the street." The laughter that followed Walter out the door was like shrapnel, each chuckle a small wound to his dignity. Rick walked Walter to the sidewalk and handed him his wallet, which Tyler had left on the counter like discarded trash. "I'm sorry, sir," Rick whispered. "I know this isn't right." Walter's hands trembled as he bent to retrieve his scattered identification cards from the pavement. The same hands that had once steadied a rifle scope, that had pulled wounded teammates to safety, now struggled with the simple task of gathering his dignity off the concrete. In the parking lot, a middle-aged man named James was just getting out of his SUV when he witnessed Walter's humiliation. James stopped cold, recognition dawning on his face. He knew that silhouette, that careful way of moving, that unmistakable bearing. Without hesitation, James pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Eric, it's James Patterson. I need you to listen carefully. Someone just threw Walter Briggs out of a gun store like he didn't matter." Meanwhile, inside the store, a customer who had been recording the incident posted it to a veterans support forum with the caption, "What did they just do to Sergeant Briggs?" The response was immediate and explosive. Comments flooded in from across the country. "Briggs was my squad leader in Mogadishu. I still have his handwritten letter to my family when I was wounded. The last time someone disrespected him like this, a colonel resigned in shame. That man saved my life in 1987. Someone better fix this." The video was shared hundreds of times within the first hour. Private messages began circulating through veteran networks, encrypted group chats that connected former SEALs across the globe. Briggs was kicked out of Frontline Tactical. Who's within 10 miles? 8 of us can be there in an hour. Rolling now. This ends today. Back at his apartment, Walter sat quietly in his favorite chair, staring at the Purple Heart display case his grandson had made for him in woodshop class. The citation read, "For wounds received in action while saving the lives of 4 teammates under heavy enemy fire." He thought about the Colt 1911 he had wanted to buy, about the tradition he had hoped to continue, about the look of shame he would see in his grandson's eyes when he had to explain why he couldn't complete this simple purchase. For the first time in decades, Walter Briggs, who had never retreated from any battle, felt truly defeated. Not by enemy soldiers or impossible odds, but by the casual cruelty of people who had never learned to recognize sacrifice when it stood quietly before them. Outside his window, the sound of multiple engines announced that reinforcements were arriving. 57 minutes after Walter's humiliation, 8 black SUVs pulled up outside Frontline Tactical in perfect formation. The vehicles parked with military precision, blocking every exit from the store's parking lot. The doors opened simultaneously, and 8 men stepped out. They wore dress uniforms bearing the distinctive insignia of Navy SEALs, their bearing unmistakably military. Dark sunglasses and grim expressions completed the picture of professionals who had come to handle business. Leading them was Lieutenant Colonel Eric Malone, now retired but still carrying himself with the authority of someone who had commanded elite warriors in the world's most dangerous places. In 1988, he had been a Green recruit serving under Sergeant Walter Briggs in operations that remained classified to this day. The SEALs walked into Frontline Tactical with the measured pace of men who were accustomed to having their presence change the atmosphere of any room they entered. Conversations stopped. Customers stepped aside instinctively. Even Tyler, despite his arrogance, felt something shift in the air. Eric approached the counter where Tyler stood, suddenly looking much younger and less confident than he had an hour earlier. Without a word, Eric placed his military identification and unit insignia on the glass surface. "We're here to find the person who just kicked Sergeant Briggs out of this establishment," Eric said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made grown men snap to attention. Tyler's bravado crumbled instantly. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about. Some old guy was causing problems, and we asked him to leave. That's standard procedure." Eric opened a leather portfolio and spread several documents across the counter. The top page showed a black-and-white photograph of a younger Walter Briggs in full military gear, standing with his SEAL team in what was clearly a combat zone. "This man," Eric said, his voice growing stronger and ensuring everyone in the store could hear, "is the recipient of the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism under fire. We call him the man who never steps back." A second SEAL stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Sergeant Briggs carried me 3 miles through enemy territory after I took shrapnel to both legs. If not for him, my son wouldn't have a father today." Eric continued, pulling out more documents. Operation Desert Storm. Mogadishu. Kosovo. For 32 years, Walter Briggs served this country with distinction. He has more confirmed saves than most medics see in their entire careers. The store had fallen completely silent. Tyler's face had gone pale, and Rick, the security guard, was standing at attention despite being in civilian clothes. "He didn't come here today to cause trouble," Eric announced to the entire store. "He came to buy a Colt 1911 as a gift for his grandson, continuing a family tradition that began when his own father gave him the same model before Walter shipped out to Vietnam at age 19. A third SEAL spoke up, his voice carrying across the hushed store. "Every man in this room owes his freedom to people like Walter Briggs. While you were safe in your beds, he was standing guard in places you can't pronounce, facing enemies you'll never have to see." Eric gestured toward his team, and all 8 SEALs came to attention in perfect unison. As one, they executed a flawless military salute not toward the store, but toward the parking lot where Walter sat in his old car, still unaware of the intervention happening on his behalf. The salute lasted 30 seconds, an eternity in the silence that had engulfed Frontline Tactical. Customers who had been laughing an hour earlier now stood with bowed heads. Several people were quietly crying. "We're going to invite Sergeant Briggs back in," Eric announced, "and he's going to complete his purchase. And every person in this store is going to treat him with the respect that a Navy Cross recipient deserves." Tyler tried to stammer an apology, but Eric cut him off with a look that had once intimidated terrorists. "You had your chance to show respect," Eric said quietly. "You chose humiliation instead. Now you get to watch what honor looks like when it stands up for itself." One of the SEALs walked outside to where Walter sat in his car, still processing what had happened to him. The SEAL knocked gently on the window and said 6 words that would restore Walter's faith in the Brotherhood he had served. "Sergeant Briggs, your men are here. Type Brotherhood never forgets. If you believe some bonds can never be broken by time or distance." The next day, Frontline Tactical posted a sign announcing it would be closed for 3 days for personnel restructuring. Tyler was terminated immediately, and Rick, the security guard, was promoted to store manager with instructions to implement a veteran-first policy. The veteran community's response was swift and overwhelming. An official statement circulated through military networks. "If Sergeant Briggs ever helped you, send your thanks before 6 p.m. today." Nearly 200 handwritten letters, flower arrangements, and military memorabilia arrived at Walter's apartment. Among them was a personal letter from the Secretary of the Navy, thanking Walter for his continued service to the ideals that make America strong. The viral video that had started as mockery was now being shared for entirely different reasons. Veterans across the country were using it as a teaching moment, explaining to younger generations what real heroism looked like and why respect for service members should never be conditional on age or appearance. Walter's response to the outpouring of support was characteristically humble. When contacted by local news stations, he declined interviews but released a single statement. "I'm not angry. I'm just sorry for a generation that doesn't know who kept them safe while they slept." 1 week later, Walter's grandson received an unexpected delivery. Inside a wooden presentation case was a pristine Colt 1911, engraved with the words, "To the inheritor of honor from the man who never steps back." The gun store's new management had personally overseen the engraving and delivered it as a gift, along with a lifetime membership to their Veterans Discount program. But the most meaningful change came from the store's customers. Word had spread about what had happened, and Frontline Tactical became an unofficial gathering place for veterans. Former service members would stop by not just to shop, but to share stories and connect with others who understood the unique challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life. Rick implemented a wall of honor, featuring photographs and service records of local veterans. Walter's photo held the place of honor at the center, with his Navy Cross citation displayed beneath it. The young woman who had whispered that Walter's treatment seemed wrong returned to the store a month later. She brought her teenage son and specifically requested to meet any veterans who might be there that day. "I want him to understand," she told Rick, "that freedom isn't free, and the people who paid for it deserve our respect, not our ridicule." Walter occasionally visited the store, not to shop, but to sit quietly in the corner where Rick had placed a comfortable chair marked "Reserved for Heroes." Younger veterans would approach him there, seeking advice, or simply wanting to shake the hand of a legend. The transformation was complete. A place that had once mocked service had become a sanctuary for those who had served. Veterans don't demand recognition, but humiliation, even a single word, can wound an entire generation of those who served. Walter didn't need applause, but the way he was pushed out like a social burden that cannot remain silent forever. Those who once carried guns for their country don't deserve to be humiliated just for being old, quiet, or having trembling hands. If you've ever seen someone disrespected simply because they didn't fight back, remember, they might have once held the front line for you. Subscribe if you believe some honors must be remembered no matter how much time has passed, for those who've been forgotten. Respect isn't a gift. It's a responsibility we owe those who protected us. Type, "Respect your vets," if you believe no one who served should ever be forgotten.